At first, it was just another summer storm system drifting over South Florida, but then, in less than 48 hours, over 15 inches of relentless rain transformed 2 million acres of swamp and wilderness into a submerged wasteland. Highways like the Tamiami Trail vanished beneath 7 feet of water. Everglades City's 500 residents were stranded and powerless as rising floodwaters isolated entire communities. The official warnings described a disaster, but the real aftermath revealed something nobody expected. Brand new rivers carved through the landscape, native and invasive animals trapped side by side, and pollution that had remained hidden for decades, suddenly unleashed. What really happened beneath the surface of Florida's historic flooding, and what does it mean for the future of the Everglades? This investigation starts the moment the skies opened. On satellite images from the GOES 16 weather system, 2 storm cells collide over South Florida, their swirling arms feeding energy into a single massive front. At ground level, rainfall gauges in the Big Cypress Basin and Water Conservation Area 3A begin to register numbers not seen in decades. In just 48 hours, the sky delivers over 15 inches of rain, enough to drown the entire landscape from the sawgrass prairies to the cypress domes. More than 2 million acres, an area larger than the state of Delaware, are swallowed by water. The scale is difficult to grasp. Familiar boundaries vanish, and the usual patchwork of wetlands becomes a single unbroken sheet. Dr. Rafael Cruz, a hydrologist with decades of fieldwork in the Everglades, pores over the incoming data. He traces the outlines of the flood on digital maps, watching as the blue spreads across satellite overlays, erasing roads and tree islands. The numbers confirm what the eye can barely believe. Rainfall intensity matches or exceeds the worst-case scenarios from climate models. The entire water management system, built to handle seasonal surges, is overwhelmed in hours. Every gauge, every canal, every levee is pushed to its limits. The event is not simply a heavy rainstorm, it is a hydrologic overload on a scale that will reshape the region for years to come. Floodwaters press outward, overtaking the boundaries of the Everglades and swallowing the lines that once separated wilderness from the built world. Along the Tamiami Trail, depth sensors from the Department of Transportation begin to transmit alarming numbers, water rising past 4, then 5, then 7 feet above the pavement. The steady pulse of these readings is matched by drone footage capturing a continuous pool stretching for miles, the road vanishing beneath a silvery expanse. Highway 27, a vital north-south artery, disappears under a 100-mile-long sheet of water, cutting off access to towns and ranches that depend on it. Miguel Santos, a civil engineer who has spent years studying Florida's flood control systems, stands at the edge of the submerged Tamiami. He points out where the roadbed, designed nearly a century ago, now acts as a dam, trapping water on one side and forcing it to spill over in unpredictable directions. Santos shakes his head at the design flaws exposed by the crisis. Culverts too small, bridges too few, and upgrades delayed by years of debate. Emergency crews reroute traffic, but there is nowhere for it to go. The water's reach is absolute. For residents and first responders, the familiar grid of roads becomes a memory. In its place, a vast, uninterrupted floodplain stretches from horizon to horizon, isolating entire communities and turning the region's infrastructure into little more than a series of stranded islands. Everglades City, a small outpost on the edge of the swamps, found itself surrounded by water on all sides. With every road out underwater and the main power station disabled, 500 residents spent the night in darkness, cut off from the outside world. Cell service faded as batteries died and towers failed, leaving only the crackle of emergency radios. For many, the only light came from flashlights pressed against boarded windows, illuminating anxious faces and water creeping up porch steps. At 0345, the first rescue airboat launched from the county fire station, piloted by Captain Maya Ortiz. Her voice came steady over the radio, coordinating with volunteers and emergency crews, plotting a course through submerged neighborhoods where street signs vanished and currents pulled at every turn. Ortiz had spent her life navigating these waters, but nothing in her experience compared to the scale of this flood. Emergency logs recorded her team's progress as they ferried stranded families from second-story balconies and church rooftops, sometimes returning with a dozen people at a time. Inside the city, neighbors checked on each other by shouting across flooded yards. Makeshift shelters formed in the high school gym, where cots lined up in rows and the air hung heavy with humidity and worry. Ortiz's determination set the tone for the hours ahead. Every sortie a lifeline, every name checked off a small victory against the rising uncertainty. All across the flooded edge of the Everglades, the boundaries between wild and human worlds dissolved overnight. By sunrise, alligators began turning up where they had never been seen before, on back roads, in driveways, even clustered along the shoulders of Highway 27. Wildlife survey teams counted more than 300 gators forced onto pavement, their massive bodies blocking rescue convoys and startling stranded families. In the outskirts of Immokalee, a pair of Florida panthers slinked through a church parking lot, their usual hunting grounds miles away and now buried underwater. 15 confirmed panther sightings were logged in neighborhoods that had never seen one before. Snakes, too, took to higher ground in numbers no one could remember. Utility workers reported 12 separate poles, each coiled with a thick, dark Burmese python, their bodies draped over transformers and lines. The surge in sightings sent a ripple of anxiety through the region, as emergency crews navigated streets where every step could bring a close encounter. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a field biologist with the state's Wildlife Commission, described the scene as an ecological shock wave. In her words, the flood didn't just move water, it moved everything living in it. For these animals, survival meant risking the unknown, crossing roads, entering yards, climbing whatever stood above the flood. The Everglades' ancient rhythms were broken, replaced by a scramble for refuge in a world suddenly remade. By midday, the response shifted from some scattered rescues to a coordinated operation spanning the entire flooded region. County officials activated a joint command center, logging every available asset on whiteboards and digital maps. 3 Army surplus Huey helicopters lifted off from a staging area outside Naples, their rotors thumping over submerged neighborhoods. Each chopper carried medics, ropes, and thermal scanners to spot stranded residents in attics or on rooftops. On the ground, 12 airboats, some county-owned, others pressed into service from local tour operators, formed the backbone of the rescue fleet. 2 flat-bottom rescue boats ferried supplies and shuttled evacuees from makeshift docks where driveways once ended. 48 responders worked in rotating shifts: firefighters, sheriff's deputies, wildlife officers, and volunteers who knew the back routes through the cypress. Carlos Ramirez, the county's emergency operations chief, directed the logistics from a trailer packed with radios and laptops. Ramirez mapped the search grid by hand, matching radio calls to GPS pings, and rerouted crews as new distress signals came in. Crews marked cleared houses with colored tarps or spray paint, then moved on to the next pocket of isolation. Fuel and battery shortages forced creative solutions, jerry cans slung from helicopter skids, solar chargers set up on any patch of dry ground. Every hour, the command center tallied rescues, tracking the slow but steady progress against a disaster that had erased the normal boundaries of help and hope. Water levels began to fall almost as quickly as they had risen. Daily gauge readings from the U.S. Geological Survey documented a recession of 4 feet per day across wide swaths of the Everglades, a pace that exposed new landforms with every sunrise. Where a week before there had been a single, endless lake, the floodplain now broke apart into a jigsaw of mudflats, scoured channels, and isolated pools. Dr. Priya Nair, a geomorphologist with the South Florida Water Management District, tracked the transformation by comparing drone surveys and LiDAR scans. She noted the sudden appearance of more than 50 new water channels, each slicing through the soft peat and limestone, some stretching for miles. The force of the drawdown had ripped away an estimated 25,000 cubic meters of limestone, leaving exposed bedrock and uprooted cypress trees, over 120 counted in a single surveyed grid. Luis Ortega, a field technician, mapped the fresh scars using handheld GPS. He marked places where the ground had simply vanished, replaced by gullies and sinkholes. In some areas, the soil was gone down to the roots, with bare trunks jutting from the mud like driftwood. The old boundaries were gone, familiar trails erased, new islands and peninsulas formed overnight. For the first time since the storm, scientists and residents alike could see the full extent of the damage. The landscape was not returning to what it had been. It was something new, shaped by water and loss, and waiting for whatever would come next. Predators that once ruled separate corners of the swamp now found themselves pressed into the same shrinking pools. Alligators, driven together by the sudden loss of territory, began clashing at rates never recorded before. Wildlife officers logged a 40% jump in aggressive encounters, with battered gators turning up along muddy banks and even in abandoned parking lots. But it wasn't just the natives fighting for space. Burmese pythons, some reaching lengths of 18 feet, emerged in broad daylight, coiled on levees and clustered around the few remaining dry patches. Jenna Lee, a veteran snake removal specialist, described a scene straight out of a nightmare. Dozens of pythons tangled together, each one hungry and on edge. Her field notes from that week detail a record number of removals, including a massive female so large it took 3 people to haul her out. The usual food web, already strained by years of mammal decline, now twisted into something unrecognizable. With prey scarce and territory compressed, both gators and pythons turned on each other, reshaping the balance of power in a landscape still reeling from the flood. As the floodwaters retreated, signs of life began to reappear in places long thought barren. Dr. Sam Patel, an ornithologist with the state's Wildlife Commission, led dawn surveys across the mudflats and new channels. His team's logbook recorded 30 prothonotory warblers flitting through willow thickets, a number not seen here in years. Even more striking, wood storks, once absent from these stretches, returned to nest in the exposed cypress, their broad wings casting shadows over the water's edge. Patel called it a hopeful turn, a reminder of the Everglades' capacity for renewal when old patterns are broken. Yet, beneath the surface, the story grew more complicated. Ana Delgado, a water chemist from the University of Florida, collected samples from the receding pools. Her assays revealed a steady rise in salinity, an increase of 0.8 parts per thousand above normal, enough to stress native plants and fish. Delgado noted that while the flood scouring force had opened new habitats for birds, it also carried saltwater and agricultural runoff deep into the marsh. For every rare return, there was a silent pressure building, a chemical shadow trailing the flood's wake. As the last pools of water drained away, the flood's true legacy surfaced in places few expected. Mark Stevenson, an environmental toxicologist, stepped carefully across a patch of exposed mud near the C-43 canal. He flagged a cluster of rusted barrels, 45 in total, half buried and leaking a chemical sheen into the receding water. EPA files later confirmed the contents. Industrial waste, 12,000 cubic meters in all, swept out from decades-old dumping grounds that the flood had unearthed. Not far away, Tom Whitaker, a structural engineer, surveyed the site where a 200-meter gap had ripped open in the main levee. The breach had sent water roaring into nearby fields, scouring away soil and leaving behind a tangle of debris and twisted metal. Engineering reports traced the failure to corroded reinforcements and years of deferred maintenance. Downstream, the C-43 pump station ran at just 30% of its normal capacity, crippled by flood debris and electrical shorts. The system designed to protect the region had instead exposed its deepest vulnerabilities, and the cost of repair was only beginning to be counted. Rows of citrus trees stand stripped and brown, their roots drowned in stagnant water. Javier Morales, a third-generation grower, walks the ruined grove in silence. He marks each tree lost with a red flag, row after row, nearly 40% of his family's harvest gone. Across the region, Farm Bureau reports a $1.8 billion blow to agriculture, oranges and grapefruit wiped out, sugarcane flattened, and 12,000 head of cattle lost to exhaustion and contaminated water. Morales' neighbor, Luis Alvarez, organizes a rescue relay, 50 volunteers moving feed and medicine by airboat to isolated ranches. The group's logbook fills with names and needs: hay for cattle, insulin for a diabetic child, a generator for a family stranded on a flooded road. Alvarez's phone rings through the night, each call another plea for help. In the face of devastation, the community forges new bonds, trading labor and supplies with a quiet determination. The numbers are staggering, but the story is written in the hands that dig, carry, and rebuild, one field at a time. Tourism, once the lifeblood of the region, collapsed almost overnight. Visitor numbers dropped by a quarter as airboat tours, fishing charters, and wildlife excursions shut down, leaving guides and hospitality workers without paychecks for weeks. Dr. Karen Liu, an economist tracking disaster impacts, calculated that insurance claims and lost revenue from tourism alone topped $120 million in the first month. Hotels and restaurants along the Gulf Coast reported empty rooms and canceled reservations well into the next season, compounding the economic pain for small businesses already stretched thin. While local economies struggled, scientists like Professor Michael Green pointed to a broader pattern. NOAA sea level gauges in South Florida showed 3.2 millimeters rise this year, part of a steady climb that has doubled in speed since the 1990s. Green's research tracked a regional temperature anomaly of 0.5 degrees Celsius above average, fueling not just this flood, but a string of extreme events across the Gulf. The numbers tie a single disaster to a global trend, where every flooded street and shuttered shop echoes a planet growing warmer and less predictable. Councilwoman Rita Delgado stands before a packed chamber, her voice steady as she outlines a $2.3 billion plan for recovery. The blueprint calls for reinforcing 150 miles of levees, installing 200 new water level sensors, and relocating at least 5,000 residents from the most flood-prone neighborhoods. Real estate surveys show a 15% drop in property values across key zones, and the choices on the table are stark. Invest in smarter, more resilient infrastructure, or help entire communities move to higher ground. Delgado argues for a future built on adaptation, not retreat. Her proposal hinges on federal and state funding, but also on the willingness of residents to accept a new normal. Urban planner Kevin Sato points to shifting demographics as younger families weigh whether to rebuild or leave altogether. The debate stretches late into the night, echoing through town halls and living rooms. For every family that chooses to stay, another packs up for good, leaving behind empty streets and unanswered questions. The path forward is uncertain, but the cost of inaction is now impossible to ignore. Today, Florida's wetlands stand altered, some scars visible, others hidden beneath the surface. As climate extremes intensify, the line between natural resilience and irreversible loss grows dangerously thin. Communities, wildlife, and infrastructure now face a future shaped by forces we can no longer ignore. The next flood may not wait for us to prepare. What's revealed now demands action, before surprise becomes catastrophe. Share your perspective below.